Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. I'm going to give just another minute to allow the rest of the folks to come in. I can see that everyone is joining right now. Welcome. Thank you for joining our seminar. Wonderful to have you all with us today. Just giving another few seconds for everyone to get logged in. All right, I think I'm going to go ahead and get started since we have a really brief but content-packed webinar to get through today, because this topic is one that I know is on the forefront of all of our minds as we think about kind of the state of affairs of the country right now, and we think about really where our workplaces are as we as individuals navigate through the political polarization that we're seeing as a society. And so we at the National Conflict Resolution Center are so proud and excited to bring this workshop to you today. It's just half an hour, but it is part of a series, a new series that we're offering called Navigating the Uncharted. And the goal of this series is really for us at the National Conflict Resolution Center to share some of our best strategies, tools, and tips with you, workplace leaders who are doing just that, navigating the uncharted, the new workplace that is ahead of us, as we're all kind of grappling with issues that maybe we haven't historically had to deal with before as people in management or supervisory positions or just any kind of workplace leadership role. And so we're going to be offering a free 30-minute webinar, 30 to 45-minute webinar, really over the next year, about once every other month, on different hot topics in the workplace today. And I promise that with every one, you're going to leave with some new strategies that you can use immediately in your workplace. And our goal is really to share these resources so that the word can get out and so that we can kind of help address some of these issues. Now, of course, if you already know NCRC, the National Conflict Resolution Center, you know that we have multiple trainings, and we do trainings that are anywhere from an hour to 3 hours to even a 4-week certificate course that we have. So we love to dive deep into these topics, and in 30 minutes, we're just going to kind of do touch base on some of these. But I want you to keep in mind that we are always here to continue the conversation, and we are always here to really get our hands dirty, I like to say, and kind of wrestle with the material and practice the material through some of our other workshops. We love to interact at NCRC. I believe strongly in learning by doing. So if you have any questions or want to just even post in the chat today, I really want to encourage you to use that feature, especially with questions. If I have time at the end, I would love to look at a couple of those questions. So make sure you use the Q&A function. A member of my team, Susanna, is here with us today. And if she sees anything that's a really burning question, or that maybe we should kind of interrupt and ask right then, she's going to kind of keep me apprised of that and then help me monitor that at the end. So I just encourage you to use that feature if you can and want to. All right, so navigating the polarized workplace. I'm really excited to talk with you about this topic. And I think, first of all, we have to dive into really, why this matters in the first place. My apologies, there we go. So this is an interesting position that we're in as workplace leaders right now, because there's really no longer this mentality of, oh, that conversation doesn't belong in the workplace anymore. I think the perfect example of this is what just happened with the Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe versus Wade. Now, a number of years ago, the thought of talking openly about something as controversial as abortion in the workplace would be unthinkable. I mean, it would just be so expected that if you were to do that, maybe a workplace leader would say, hey, you know what, that's not a conversation for the workplace. Let's get, back to focused on our work. However, we no longer live in that climate, right? We live in a climate where companies and workplace leaders are expected to address these hot topic issues as they come up. So when that Supreme Court decision happened, we saw that not only were workplace leaders a little bit public about their thoughts about it, but we saw that companies themselves took a stance. There were major companies around the country who actually made statements and said, any of our employees living in states where they can no longer have access to abortion services, part of our benefit, we will provide you travel to go to a state where you can. So all of a sudden, a topic that was not really front and center in a workplace is now being brought to it. And that's just the nature of the climate that we're in. And so as workplace leaders, we're trying to figure out, how do I maintain productivity and maintain team focus while also helping address and create an environment where we're not pulled apart by our differences? Employees are feeling it too. As you can see here, a recent poll conducted by SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, found that 42% of employees say that they've had a political disagreement at work. So even in this poll, we're seeing that over half of employees are saying, yeah, this is coming up. This is impacting my daily life. So I think before we look at maybe some of the ways that as workplace leaders we can start to address this, I think it's important to have a picture of what the landscape of the country is right now. So there's this spectrum of political beliefs in the United States, and an organization called More in Common did a study really looking at the different extremes and then kind of where people fall in the US in terms of their political beliefs. They surveyed over 8,000 different citizens from across all 50 states and all different political affiliations. And what they found out when people were self-surveyed is that, of course, we had kind of people who identified and fell into what we might call the more extreme left and extreme right. But what's interesting here is that if you look at how much of the population that is, we're only talking about 33% roughly of the US population. The rest of us are kind of here in what they dubbed, More in Common dubbed, the exhausted majority. Now, you can like or not like that term, but they called it the exhausted majority because for the other 67% of the US population that identified as either kind of traditional or passive liberals or politically more disengaged or politically moderate, there was kind of a sense of exhaustion that came along with that. And what's so interesting about this study is that as they asked these 8,000 individuals if surface level questions about whether or not they felt like they could engage with someone that had a differing political view with them, there was some hesitancy, right? It was like, well, maybe depends how extreme they are, some of that. But when they started asking really core beliefs, values-centered questions to this group that's kind of considered the exhausted majority, 3 out of 4 people felt that at the end of the day, they truly did have more in common with someone that had opposite political beliefs than they had different. And what I find so interesting about that is that, again, on the surface level, it's really easy to dismiss and say, like, I don't know, and there's all these caveats. Maybe I could get along if they said this. But really, when they got to that core belief and really talking about from a human-centered approach, do you think you could work with someone? They did believe that ultimately there was that opportunity. So I think this is an important, picture for us to have in our heads, because to me, it's a bit hopeful, right? That even though we are exhausted and even though we find ourselves kind of thrust into, one camp or another so many times, more often than not, more of us believe that there is still an opportunity to engage than not. So today I'm going to talk about 3 things that you can do as a leader in your workplace today to kind of help with some of this political polarization that is impacting teams, right? Because it's quite frankly creating conflict. It's creating either outright conflict or avoidance. And if there have been people on your teams or people in various departments who are not seeing eye to eye, and that has impacted their ability to communicate well and work together, you're probably at some level experiencing an impact on your bottom line. So what are 3 really practical, tangible things that you can do as a workplace leader starting today? The first is really understand the landscape, right? This is really important. I think one of the things that we often forget is that we talk about how, oh yeah, it's so polarized out there and things are so bad. And we all know the midterm elections are coming up in exactly 1 week. And so we feel like, we know that it's bad, but do we really understand what issues are dividing us? I highly recommend checking out USC's Polarization Index. I find it to be a fascinating resource. Every year, through a series of studies and interviews and polls, USC presents the Polarization Index, and this is publicly available online. And you can actually go in and see what the hot button issues are of today, or at least of the last 6 months to a year. And so this really helps inform you as a leader. It helps inform you maybe both in what topics to stay away from, as well as what topics may need to be covered, because perhaps your job or your industry or what you do touches on some of these hot topic issues, and that may need to be addressed a little more head on than some others. And so I think just being aware of your landscape, being aware of what the topics are and where people are falling is really, really significant. The second thing that I think is really important for a workplace leader, and I actually think this is probably the most challenging for us, so we're going to spend a little bit more time on this one than any other, is being aware of your own bias. And this is so hard because I think as someone who has been in management myself, I can admit that I feel like I'm really good at bias. I have a really good understanding of it. I've been in so many bias trainings, I can't even count. Here at NCRC, we actually give an art of inclusive communication training that talks about bias. And so many of us feel like we've really gotten pretty good at examining and evaluating and really watching out for bias in areas of race, gender, age. But what is our political affiliation bias? That is tricky. And we're not talking about it that much, right? But we can see how it can impact our relationship with our employees or peers. For example, take a case where maybe you have an employee or even a peer who through seeing on social media has posted some strong feelings or thoughts about something that you do not agree with or affiliate with politically. And say you've seen that over time, and then in a month or two, you hear that that person has a conflict or has an issue with someone, and it touches on one of those issues. It's going to be very difficult for you to then engage with that person, because especially if you're their workplace leader, you might need to coach them. You might need to have a conflict resolution session with them. Something will probably need to be done, some sort of engagement or conversation. And you may already have some feelings of, ugh, I already know where they stand on this. And of course, that's what they did. And they're escalating the situation. And you're not going into that conversation with the neutrality that it really takes to have an open-ended conversation that can result in a productive outcome. So this is something that I think is a really important concept, because it's this concept of othering. And what othering is it's really us versus them. It's this mentality that they are something less than me, or me and my group that I believe in. It's really about seeing people through their group or political identities without giving too much thought to them as individuals, as the humans, the people that they are. And in a lot of ways, it's negating the person's humanity and seeing them as maybe less worthy of respect. Now, this sounds horrible to say out loud, but we see this play out every single day. And unfortunately, it's not like we just see this playing out on the playground at our kids' schools. We're seeing this play out on the largest national landscapes that we have. In politics, we're seeing it playing out in Washington, D.C. We're seeing it play out in all of the news media. And so it becomes inherent in us that we begin, even without really thinking about it, to other people who don't affiliate the way that we do politically, right? And so it's really about thinking about people outside of your social or political group, and believing that they're not as intelligent or skilled as you are. They haven't thought through the issues as much as you have, right? So this becomes a huge issue of bias for us. There are really two kinds of bias that we see come into play here. These are two cognitive biases, and unfortunately, they really block our ability to lead with inclusivity. And as leaders, we know that leading inclusively is key to our success. We know that the highest performing teams in every company surveyed anywhere at any time are diverse teams, teams that bring in various backgrounds, thoughts, challenge each other. And so if we can't lead with inclusivity, we're really struggling to have the best possible team, right? And that comes in all forms. So there's in-group bias, which is, of course, the tendency to favor one's own group. And then there's also confirmation bias. And this is that tendency to look for clues and information that support a bias you already have about another person. Okay, so we have to be aware of both of these, and we have to remember what we already know about bias, which is that it's very sneaky. We don't walk in the beginning of the day thinking I'm going to approach anything with bias, but it shows up for us. Now we're going to experience it. We're going to experience bias. That's kind of a part of who we are as humans, but that's where it has to stop. We have to stop it there and be aware of our bias and aware of then the actions that follow, so that none of it shows up in our actions, especially as leaders. So to counter this bias and this concept of othering is this concept of humble inquiry. And I think this is such a beautiful description of it, because I love it being called a fine art. Humble inquiry is the fine art of drawing someone out, of asking questions to which you do not already know the answer, or I guess it should say believe you already know the answer. And of building a relationship based on curiosity and interest in the other person. So this is how we combat our bias. So think of that example of the employee who, you saw some things on social media perhaps, or you know about their beliefs and they don't align with yours. And then you have this kind of related complaint with them in the workplace, and you are sitting down to speak with them. How are you approaching the conversation with humble inquiry? Not believing that you already have background information, not coming in when they start talking, having that confirmation bias of, oh, I knew you would say that, but really asking open-ended questions and desiring with curiosity to know from their perspective a little bit more about the situation, so that then you can truly act in the way that you need to as a leader. And of course, as a leader, it may end up that that employee needs some corrective behavior, that they need to get some coaching. Something might need to happen there, but how do we approach the conversation in the first place? That's what we're talking about here, right? And so I want us to just kind of self-reflect for a couple of minutes on these two questions. One, really, what is the benefit of being aware of your biases as a workplace leader? Just kind of thinking to yourself, what's the benefit of being aware of your biases as a workplace leader? And then also, what can you do to overcome the impact of in-group and confirmation bias? What are some tangible things that you can do? If you have ever been to one of NCRC's workshops, you know that at this point, we would be having a discussion. We would be breaking out into small groups and discussing this and coming back together. And so I wish that we had the time to do all of that today, but it doesn't mean that you can't get a lot out of this exercise. I would just say I encourage you to very much take these questions back with you and think about them so that you can really start to reflect on how this shows up in your workplace and for you. So then the third thing that you can do as a workplace leader is create opportunities to build a human-centered workplace, right? How are you engaging your employees to know each other as people so that their relationships are more than just about this polarization and differing viewpoints? We already talked about the concept of othering. And again, it's so difficult because we're seeing it everywhere, exemplified to us daily. But there's this other concept of bridging, and that is really what we can look to and try to achieve on our teams. Bridging means acknowledging our shared humanity, really rejecting this concept of them and moving toward a future where there is a new us. And this was kind of defined by John Powell. For those of you who know him, he is a law and African American studies professor at Berkeley, but he's also the director of a fabulous project called the Othering and Belonging Institute. And when we talk about kind of understanding the landscape, that is another amazing resource I highly recommend to look into. But bridging, how do we create opportunities for bridging, for our teams to really see each other for more than just either a work project, which could be dry, could be interesting, but kind of beyond that, to respect each other for the people that we are? And so as we reflect on that question, think about that. What am I doing to really create that in my teams? It could be as simple as having departmental lunches where people get to come together and talk about something other than work. It could be having social engagement time, even times for employees to potentially bring their families to like a company picnic or ball game or something where, all of a sudden I don't just see so-and-so as this person who is so different from me politically, and I'll work with them, but that's the bare minimum. And, I just really want to avoid them as much as possible. To, wow, we don't see eye to eye politically, but she is a great mother. And I really liked getting to know her kids at the company picnic. And boy, when we had that lunch the other day, she's funny. She's really, I love her sense of humor. Those kinds of things really help build respect and build teams in a much, much stronger way. So think about how you can be doing things like that on your team. And don't just wait until there's an issue. Be creating these opportunities all year long. Your team should know each other and feel respect and some sense of camaraderie for the team itself, as well as really the organization, right? The culture of the company that you work for already, so that when these issues that kind of tend to divide us come up, there's not as much of a chasm that you're starting in. So think about how you're doing those things. Now, of course, one of the ways that I believe you can be doing these things is also through training, right? Bringing in training that helps people talk about difficult issues. And so I do encourage you to know that at the National Conflict Resolution Center or anywhere that you decide to go. Of course, I think our training is absolutely the best there is. But I mean, really think about investing in training. Think about investing in inclusive communication training. Think about investing in how to give constructive feedback, how to be good bystanders and upstanders when you see behavior that is, not appropriate, and what can be done, what teams can do to stand up to that behavior. Of course, these are all workshops that are offered at NCRC, and I highly encourage you to reach out to us to learn more and see if they're a fit for your team. We also have a really interesting new certificate program. It's a 4-week certificate program built just for leaders like you. And it touches on a lot of these topics, navigating through this kind of new uncharted workplace. And we've taken 4 of our most popular workshops and put them in a program that really builds on itself over those 4 weeks to help workplace leaders, again, navigate through some of these things that have yet to really be explored in this way. And so coming from that communications expertise perspective, we really give some practical and tangible tools to look at that. So these are all options, and we would love to engage with you more if you feel like some of these topics would be helpful for your team during this time. And we also have a ton of free resources, just like this webinar. So make sure you're following us on social media, because every single week we're posting new videos with new free resources, and they're like a minute long, but full of good information. And then on our website, there's also an entire library of resources for workplace leaders where you can download videos, workplace communication toolkits, all kinds of things. So I do encourage you to take a look at that, because we recognize it's tough out there right now. We all have sometimes more questions than answers. And so where we can be a part of helping you build a workplace that can help tackle some of these conversations and issues, we really want to be. So my contact information is here if you have any questions for me. I'm also I know we just have a couple of minutes. I'm gonna see if there's any questions from the group. Also, you'll see Gabriel Garcia, who is a member of our team, and you can reach out to Gabriel at any time. He also can answer any questions that you have, just to kind of have 2 different points of contact at NCRC. So I wanted to throw that out there as well. So in our last couple of minutes, I wanted to see if there are any questions from the group. We have 2 minutes left. You're welcome to post them in the Q&A if you do. Make sure I'm not missing any. All right, I did get one question privately about how we can really kind of, I guess, navigate through that line of, protecting employees from an employee that might be doing things that are microaggressions or that are more aggressive versus just being inclusive, right? And that is a tough line as workplace leaders. We absolutely have a job to create a safe work environment for our employees. We have to do that first and foremost, a physically but psychologically safe work environment. And so if there is an employee who is being aggressive or saying things that could be considered as insults or slander towards others, that has to be addressed immediately, directly, and there has to be a stop put to that. So by no means is this like, yeah, just come as you are, come and tell us all of your feelings about this. And it's a safe space to just complain about the other side. No, that's not what we're talking about here. But we are really saying that more often than not, for the majority, again, there are more people out there who are willing to engage at some level in a respectful way than there are those who are going to do it in a hurtful way. And so protecting employees, creating a safe environment is number one, but then also being able to create environments where differing opinions can exist, but there can still be mutual respect is a huge key to being able to navigate through this. Because I hate to say it, but I don't see things calming down after this midterm election next week. And so I do think that we're going to continue to be challenged with this. And so we have to be ready to really step forward and lead in the way that we're being called to. So with that, I know it's 12:30. I want to thank you so much for joining us for the first webinar of this series. I hope you will join us for all of the other ones we have coming. We'll be advertising them soon, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.